As I am sure you have heard at this point, Christian McCaffrey has been traded from the Carolina Panthers to the 49ers. Obviously, this is awesome for his season-long value. He's going to be so much better on a better offense, and Kyle Shanahan is drooling right now with what he can do with that offense of Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Trey Lance when he gets healthy next year. Today's video is all about week 7. Do we play Christian McCaffrey this week? Do we play the other 49ers or Carolina Panther running backs? How does the slate change with all of this value now available? Well, we're going to figure that out. Let's get right into it right now. Now, as we always do, we start with the sportsbook odds and take a look at how the slate is going. Let's focus on the Christian McCaffrey games for now. The Bucs have gone from, I believe, like 9.5 to 10-point favorites all the way up to 13 without Christian McCaffrey. So the Carolina Panthers really aren't in play as a competitive football team this week. We'll take a look and see if we can find some DFS value for them. Obviously, Leonard Fournette seems like a great bid to get a bunch of carries against a team that's not going to be in the game at all. And then we're going to take a look at Chiefs 49ers, which is one of the best games on the slate and gets even more interesting with Christian McCaffrey in the fold. Obviously, we don't expect him to play all that much, but assuming that the 49ers are going to be down this game against the Patrick Mahomes-led offense, McCaffrey is going to see the field at some point. I really find it hard to believe that they don't get him in after trading a ton of picks to get him. He should be involved. Will we play him in DFS outside of Showdown? Probably not. But if you find yourself in a spot where you can be contrarian, maybe you can weasel your way into that, assuming there's a positive game script for him receiving and him getting into the red zone packages and scoring. Other than those two games, we have a couple that we're interested in. The Detroit Lions are still the league's worst defense, and Dak Prescott has returned for the Cowboys. The Cowboys are just too cheap in DFS this week. We're going to be all over them in cash and in tournaments. We also like the Detroit Lions getting Amon-Ra and DeAndre Swift back. Falcons-Bengals should be another very friendly fantasy environment. Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase went off last week. T. Higgins should be relatively healthy with that ankle injury, so they should be at full speed there. And then the Falcons are healthy outside of Cordero, so they're all going to be viable in this game that has a 47 over-under right now. Browns-Ravens is another good one. Nick Chubb had a down week, maybe low owned. You could potentially go for him. And of course, Lamar is always an option. Packers-Commanders, I don't love this game, but Aaron Rodgers can do whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Texans-Raiders could be another high-scoring game. And we're definitely going to focus on at least one Raider in this video. Chiefs-49ers, Seahawks-Chargers are the two games of the week. This is another PMR slate where there are very high-scoring games in the late windows. So we want to, have exposure to those guys, the ability to swap players if the early games don't go well, and the expectation that if we're up big in tournaments or in cash games after the 1 o'clock games happen, there's a good chance that we're going to get caught from someone in this 4 o'clock window. Let's go take a look at the DFS slate and find some tournament plays. So there are 5 games we want to focus on here, and we'll quickly run through what a stack looks like for each one. All of these are viable, both in terms of your primary game stack and your secondary game stack. And if you wanted to play someone loose from any of these games, that's totally viable. So starting off with Atlanta, Mariota has a pretty condensed target tree right now. It's Drake London and it's Kyle Pitts. If you're going to go with a Mariota stack, which is probably the worst of these options, that's your viable strategy there. And then you can bring it back with some people from our Cincinnati stack. Specifically, if we're talking about a Joe Burrow stack, Mixon's allowed. I would allow Mixon to be there, but I wouldn't force him there. Jamar Chase and T. Higgins. And you can also include Hayden Hurst in those stacks. So you can do like Mariota with London and Pitts, bring it back with Chase or Higgins there. And then you can do Burrow, Chase, Higgins, and bring it back with Mr. Kyle Pitts. Something like that totally works for this game. Going over to one of my favorite games on the week, we have Detroit versus Dallas. Dak Prescott and Jared Goff, both capable of running highly explosive offenses. You don't think of Jared Goff as explosive, but he has 2 games above 25 and 1 game at almost 40 this year. So we want to always keep Goff in the back of our minds as we're approaching tournament plays. And then Dak Prescott, coming back from his hand injury, is entirely too cheap. I know his only game this week or this year has been 5.46 points, but we all know what Dak Prescott can be against this Detroit Lions defense that's been so horrendous this year. Dak Prescott is going to be a very popular play, and we see people primarily going to go this route. We're going to go CeeDee Lamb, Gallup, and Dalton Schultz for Dak stacks. You play any 2 or 3 of these receivers, you're going to be in good shape with your DAX stacks. And then if we go back over to the Detroit side of things, there's a lot we can do here. We specifically ignored the running backs for the Cowboys because they're in a timeshare. We don't really know which one we want to go with. When we talk about Jared Goff, DeAndre Swift is going to be in play no matter what. He's getting 3 to 5 targets, which is totally viable at his sub 7K price point. So same with Mixon. I'm not going to force him into Goff stacks, but I'll allow it to happen. Amon-Ra St. Brown, obviously in play. Jameson Williams will be back soon, but not yet. He's someone we're going to look out for. And then we'll play one of the other Josh Reynolds or Khalif Raymond, depending on how the health of DJ Chark and Reynolds. And then Hawk, always available. He did have his monster game against Seattle. We don't expect that here, but he is viable for Goff stacks. Play any of those guys if you're stacking this game. Next up, we have the 3 afternoon games. So we have Derek Carr versus Davis Mills, both two very low-priced options on relatively low floor offenses, but this game has the potential to shoot out. The over-under is currently 45.5, which is on the higher side of this slate. We take a look, Jets, Broncos, 38, Colts is below that, Packers below that, Bucks below that, and Giants below that. So they're definitely in the top half. They're definitely viable for tournaments and might go a little bit under-owned because it's kind of a gross game. But we have Derek Carr, absolutely viable. Josh Jacobs, never really thought of him as a receiving back, but in these past 3 weeks, he's getting 5+ targets every single week. He is a cash lock for me this week. We'll go into cash in a little bit. But the same theme of these running backs who we don't typically think of in that, that Austin Eckler, Christian McCaffrey role. They're going to be viable today and this week for tournaments. So if you want to stack Derek Carr and Josh Jacobs, you never would have thought, saying that, but it's viable this week. And then of course we can play the top 3 receivers, Adams, Renfro, and Matt Collins. We'll take a look at the health of these top tight ends for the Raiders. Obviously, Darren Waller has not played all that much, but if he's on the slate, he's, of course, a top option. Foster Moreau, if he's healthy, and if not, you can probably punt with one of those 2 tight ends. I would probably wait and see what the health situation is there. If we're going over to the Houston Texans, Dameon Pierce, another guy, 5-6 targets. If you have a reason to believe he gets back to that number, and the coaching staff says they want to get him 20 carries, 20 touches a game, if you want to stack, go ahead. I'm probably not going to do that there. And then you can go with Cooks or Collins. This is a little bit thin just in terms of total offensive production, but it's viable. And then if you wanted to play one of the tight ends, you're kind of going to have to guess and see which one's going to be active. Brevin Jordan is the young guy in the group, and he's been injured, so he might come back. But you can also look at OJ Howard, who has the red zone upside and apparently has these big games. Seattle, LA. Now the Chargers are coming off a pretty abysmal performance in primetime. They did not throw a touchdown, even though DraftKings Sportsbook had a promo for Justin to throw 1 touchdown. Promos team, come on. How'd you know? How'd you know? But yeah, so Herbert is going to come in probably under-owned for the upside he has against this terrible Seattle defense. They're playing at home. They're playing in a revenge scenario. So Herbert is one of my favorite guys this week. You can, of course, pair him with Eckler, and then you can go with Mike Williams. Keenan Allen, if he's healthy, is relatively cheap. He did get hurt in this game, so 4 targets is definitely a lower floor. I'm going to assume he's not playing, which means that Palmer and Carter are both options, as well as Gerald Everett, who, despite having some stinkers, has been really, really solid for DFS this year, especially at his lower price points. 4K, he just needs 12 points to hit, absolutely pay that off. He's done that 3 times already this year. He could absolutely pay off if you're stacking this against the Seattle Seahawks defense. And every week we talk about Geno Smith, and every week I say I never would have thought about this at the beginning of the year, but here we are. Kenneth Walker is the running back for Seattle, has looked awesome as Rashad Penny is now on IR and not expected to return for the season. He is another guy we can consider in cash as he's just super involved and super high upside. The Chargers defense is much stronger than defenses he's played in the past, but he's an option here. We can, of course, stack Geno with his 2 receivers. Definitely want to play into him throwing the ball there. Tyler Lockett definitely busted last week. Everyone had really high expectations for him after, look at these targets, 11, 11, 8, 6. I mean, great. It is a downward trend, but these guys, it's really hard to find this kind of volume at a sub 6K price. He remains under sub 6K and should be a cash lock as well. I'm all over Tyler Lockett, and of course DK Metcalf, slightly more contrarian, but equally high upside in the Seattle offense, especially against JC Jackson, who was benched last week. So that's totally viable. And then if you wanted to punt with a tight end, you can go Fant and Disley. They're kind of splitting the snaps at tight end with Parkinson mixing in every once in a while. I definitely wouldn't play him, but you could try out one of those tight ends as well. And then in the game of the week, we have Patrick Mahomes and Jimmy Garoppolo, two guys perennially like in Super Bowl contention. Jimmy G, not from a talent perspective, from a scheme, and then Patrick Mahomes is Patrick Mahomes. We're always trying to play Pat. We will pair him with any of his receivers. I would probably only play one receiver, although you could do two if you really wanted to. You could find Hardman for savings. Juju had a great breakout game last week, and MVS does have upside as an option in this offense. And then if you really wanted to punt, Sky Moore has just gotten more and more involved, every single week. And seems to be ready to break out. I don't know when it's going to happen. If you want to be early to a Sky Moore breakout game, this could be one in a potential high scoring and shootout environment. So if you wanted to play Sky Moore in your Patrick Mahomes stacks, I would allow that this week. And then Kelsey is obviously the number one option at tight end, coming off another 20-plus point game. He's just the closest thing to a lock at tight end outside of Mark Andrews. No reason to avoid him here. Those are all of Mahomes' options. Going over to Jimmy G, this is where this video gets really interesting. Jimmy G should be in passing environments this entire game. Now, Jeff Wilson will probably be competing with Christian McCaffrey for touches here. At 5,800, he's back to his early season price points where he was putting out good numbers. We definitely stacked him in this week 5 game against Carolina, and he did really, really well. But Christian McCaffrey's there, and there's a massive unknown in this offense as to how he's going to be involved. I would not play Jeff Wilson for the fear of McCaffrey actually getting up to speed on the offense within a week. That boy went to Stanford. He's smart enough. If you're playing the passing game, the two options are very clear. It's Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk. They are the two top receivers. Deebo has a little bit more rushing upside. Ayuk is probably the better pure receiver. There are options there. You can go to Kittle if you want to. He's gotten more involved in the offense as he's gone on. He's been blocking a lot with the loss of Trent Williams on that offensive line, but they clearly need to get him involved, and he has gone on an upward trajectory and should be in shape for another good game against Kansas City here. So if you're stacking this game, those are the guys you want to focus on. Now, according to DraftKings rules, Christian McCaffrey should be eligible to accrue points as a member of the San Francisco 49ers. He is on the same slate and should be traded at some point on Friday on DraftKings, so you should be able to play him as a 49er in this slate. That being said, he is 8,400 and the most expensive running back on the entire slate. For his projected involvement, it's going to be very difficult for him to pay off his price, and I would strongly recommend against including him in your Jimmy Garoppolo stacks or as a solo option, just because of his potential limited involvement. He's going to be a better on-the-field play than fantasy this week, and I just don't see him getting more than 8 to 10 touches, if that, and playing 20 to 30% of the snaps, which eats enough of Jeff Wilson's volume away to make him irrelevant, and doesn't give McCaffrey enough involvement to make him relevant either. Now that we've talked about tournaments, let's go over to cash. What we're looking for in cash is eating ownership, points per dollar, and playing the right plays. There are a couple guys that are glaring values that we'll get into later, but let's start with the quarterbacks this week. Now, quarterback is more spread out this week than it has been in the previous few weeks. There are a ton of options because no one is really all that highly priced, and everyone has a points per dollar expectation and relatively even ownership. A lot of guys in good spots like Lamar Jackson, Mahomes, even Herbert, Burrow, Prescott, Brady, like every single one of these guys is viable in cash. As we go out throughout the week, we'll see where ownership condenses and where the field goes, and that's how we'll make our decision on cash. But right now, if I had to rank my cash plays, I'd probably go Geno Smith in probably a positive game environment for him as my first option. I'd put Lamar as 2, Burrow at 3, and then Dak Prescott, who probably doesn't project for much ownership right now. I think he's just in the smash spot of smash pots, and I anticipate his ownership steaming up. And as we sit here on Thursday night after Thursday night football, if you're looking on Saturday and Sunday, I'm going to say that Dak Prescott is going to be the cash quarterback, and we're going to include him here for now. At running back, there's a couple smash plays, and one has actually become a smash play because of the Christian McCaffrey trade. We'll get into him in a second. The first biggest lock of the week is Josh Jacobs. We talked about him in tournaments. He is so crazy involved, getting minimum 25, 27 touches in the past couple weeks. He is just way too cheap, even at 6,500. You know, he's come up, he started at 63, came down to 54, and has climbed steadily back up to the 65 range. This is the most expensive he's been on the year, but there's no reason to not play him for that involvement. There's nobody at his price point getting his usage and getting his involvement in the offense. Like, click. Next guy up is Kenneth Walker, another guy who is just too cheap for his involvement in the offense. The price has not caught up to his new role with Rashad Penny out, getting 21 carries. His floor is probably 16 at this point, with a little bit of receiving upside at sub 6K. That's exactly what we look for. He profiles exactly like our Jeff Wilson play a couple weeks ago, so we're grabbing him here. And then we're taking the next running back, which is now Leonard Fournette, in a potential low-scoring game environment where the Bucs aren't going to have to score that many points. I anticipate Leonard Fournette getting every single bit of usage. He is getting an insane number of targets, still gets 15 plus carries a week. I anticipate this, probably being a little bit higher given the fact that Brady won't be throwing a lot. So we're going to click him here, and we're going to run a 3 running back cash build on DraftKings this week. Now, there's 2 plays at defense at cash this week. The first one, as we just talked about in the Leonard Fournette segment, the Bucs are going up against the Panthers without Christian McCaffrey. I struggle to imagine that they move the ball at all, and the Bucs are going to be, facing PJ Walker at quarterback. So a lot of turnovers potentially there, a lot of opportunity for sacks. They are just really expensive. So we're going to go down and find a different option, and that's the New York Jets going against Russell Wilson. Now, of course, Russell Wilson due for a turnaround at some point, but he is injured. He has struggled mightily this year, and the Jets defense has looked pretty solid. In the past 3 weeks, they put up above 9 points, with last week scoring that defensive touchdown. So the Jets are absolutely in play. They're too cheap for their potential upside against the Broncos. Cash at tight end this week is interesting. You have 2 options. You can pay up for tight end and go Kelsey Andrews. That's always safe, and that's always a differentiator when it comes to tight end. No other guy really has their upside consistently at the position. We've seen Hawkinson have big games. Kittle could get there, and Kyle Pitts is always kind of this unknown, like, will he ever break out? But there's no 2 guys like them on this slate. But if you want to go to a cheap tight end, there are 2 options for you. The first is the most highly projected ownership tight end on the week, and that's Greg Dulcich. He only had 3 targets last week, but as a rookie making his premiere in the league, he did really, really well. He will be their number 1 tight end. No one else is really impressed in that offense, and he took a big touchdown to the crib. So we're anticipating a spike in involvement here, and at the tight end bare minimum, he is a good play. The other guy we want to talk about is K. Dotton in the Bucs offense. I'm putting a slight downgrade on him because he's above that min price, and because I don't anticipate the Bucs throwing all that much. It's, you can play him if you want to soak up some ownership, but Dulcich seems to be the guy that you want to play at tight end. Of course, you can go for Kelsey and Andrews and try to get some differentiation at that position and get some safety in that high upside, but I don't believe that's necessary this week in cash. And last but not least, we need to talk about wide receiver in cash this week. There are some clear-cut stud options and some pay down spots as well. You can get a little different at some spots, but here's where I'm going for right now. The first up is CeeDee Lamb. He projects at an insanely high ownership, with Dak coming back, minimum 8 targets at 6.8K. CeeDee Lamb projects as an absolute smash play. He is fully practicing. He had a little hip issue earlier in the week, but he is good to go. Has not hit the bonus yet this year. I'd be surprised if he doesn't hit it in this game environment. CeeDee Lamb, absolute lock for us in cash. The other guy we're going to play is Tyler Lockett, the lock of the Seattle Seahawks. This week, notice we have 2 Seahawks in our cash lineup. I think that's fine for now. If the total on that game comes down, we can look to swap out Kenneth Walker and maybe go up to someone like Breece Hall or Dameon Pierce. in cash this week. But for right now, I'm totally comfortable with having 2 Seahawks in our cash lineup. Lockett projects as a really good play. He had a down week last week, but still has a very safe minimum floor of targets. And at 5,800, doesn't need all that much to pay off. If he gets to 15, 16 points, he is a great play in cash. With 5,600 left, we can kind of go wherever we want here. There's a ton of other options. I'll go through a bunch of them quickly. Juju Smith-Schuster looked like the breakout the Chiefs have wanted him to be since they signed him this offseason. 5 for 113, hitting a big one for 42 last week. Drake London, super involved in the offense. Down week last week, which should be better. Curtis Samuel just gets tons of targets. Check on Dimey Brown's health there. He's in play. Michael Gallup is one of my favorite options. Would be our second Cowboy in cash, so I don't know if I'm going to get to him. But increasing involvement as he looks to be healthy. Dak's back. Great game environment. He's too cheap. Dobbs, he's the wide receiver 1 for Green Bay right now in terms of targets, so he is absolutely in play. Hunter Renfrow is too cheap. The gross option we kind of need to talk about is DJ Moore. He's 4,900. This is the cheapest I think he has ever been on DraftKings. He is the only guy left in Carolina. Christian McCaffrey, now a 49er. Robbie Anderson, now a Cardinal. The offense just has no one else other than him. He's getting like a minimum of 6, 7, 11 targets at sub 5K. Like, if he doesn't go off, that'd be, not shocking, because the Carolina Panthers are going to be awful and they're going to be down and they're not going to be able to do anything. But he's too cheap for his involvement in the offense and what's going to be an increased role because of McCaffrey and Robbie Anderson being out. So I'm going to put him in now. And we have $700 left to play with. We can go up from Seattle, go up from Kenneth Walker to Dameon Pierce, play 2 guys in the same game there. You can go up to Breece Hall, pair that with our Jets defense. There's a lot of options you have, but I'm going to play this for now. We're going to go find Kenneth Walker and have $700 remaining. So that's going to do it for our cash lineups. We went over tournaments and we talked about McCaffrey. That's going to do it for this video. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, do all those things, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Let's go.